Hey everybody, this is Pete Bartolozzi welcoming you to another class session. And we're continuing in the book of Exodus and looking at, what took place during that time of the Jews being delivered from Egypt, but also seeing some parallels of today. And we just got done in the last class session in reading a lot of things from Josephus. I know I did a lot of reading from there, and but it's good, interesting information. It's historical information, and we saw how God had properly prepared Moses for the call that God had placed upon his life. Uh, in fact, it's interesting to note that God not only created his outward appearance, but also, again, his intellect, his abilities, even his personality and disposition to fit well with his call in Moses' life. Not only was Moses' looks and stature greatly appealing to the Egyptian culture, but he also had great learning ability that fit a leader of a nation and the wisdom to lead an army into victory in battle. All of these things were necessary for the fulfillment of what God had for him in life. God, being omniscient, knew the future and therefore knew what gifts were needed in his life to accomplish God's purpose in his life. But he had to learn humility after letting the fact that he was called as God's choice to bring forth his deliverance of Israel from bondage, and proceeded to accomplish it or endeavor to accomplish it on his own and without God's timing, just like others throughout history, including today, who have had to learn humility before being used to fulfill their God-given purpose and destiny. Daniel and his three Hebrew friends were trained to be a part of King Nebuchadnezzar's council in Babylon. They were brought up through their education system that was full of a lot of demonic teachings and understandings and so on. But as brought out in chapter 1 of Daniel, because of them honoring God by not eating of the king's meat, God blessed them with knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, to the point that when they were tested by King Nebuchadnezzar, he found them to be 10 times better, that is, 10 times smarter than all the wise men throughout his entire kingdom. And this gave them what they needed to accomplish their God-given destiny. Winston Churchill was a man of strong character who led England through the most trying time in their history. I believe God prepared him for the time he would be prime minister. I did watch a documentary one time of Winston Churchill's life, and one of the things that was rather interesting in looking at this documentary is that during World War I, he was in a political position. I believe it had something to do with like the Secretary of Navy or something like that. We call it Secretary of Navy here. I don't know if they call it that in England, but something along those lines. But he was during World War I, he was in this position. And then he was a part of several people who had made the decision to make an invasion of what was called Gallipoli in the area of Turkey to create another front. It was even indicated that he might not have been fully in agreement with this decision, but when the decision was made, he put his best effort into making things a success. But it turned out to be one of the greatest disasters of World War I. And all too many men died, and a lot of them were wounded. So a majority of them, I believe, either died or were wounded. But they basically made him their scapegoat, and they put it all on him after World War I. He was removed from political office. People said that his political career was over. People, anytime he tried to begin to speak publicly, people a lot of times for probably 10 years past that would shout out, "What about Gallipoli?" Because they put it all on him, and he would just continue to go forward through all that, but then became prime minister, and that's primarily what we know him for now. We don't know about all of this other stuff except for those who maybe study his life and so on. So I believe God prepared him for that time. And a lot of great leaders went through a lot of tough things through their life, made mistakes, sometimes some pretty major mistakes. But God was able, but as they continued on and stayed steady and through all those things, and they usually would be prepared to come out on top. In fact, after he was elected Prime Minister of England during World War II, he stated, "All my past life has been but preparation for this hour, for this trial." Someone said that people can't handle strong leaders like this except through the toughest of times, as Churchill was. And after the war, they elected somebody else. I have believed since the 90s that God needed to raise up a strong leader like Churchill in this country, because I knew we were going to be in a major struggle to return this nation to the godly foundation that our founding fathers established. When President Donald Trump ran for president the first time, there were those who were concerned about him, Christians, mistaking his strength, his strong character, as narcissism, because the former so-called president was narcissistic and they didn't want another, when what he has is not narcissistic. I told people who were concerned that we needed somebody of strong character to lead us through these tough times that we were going through and we were about to go through in order to turn this nation around. And President Trump has demonstrated the kind of strength that is needed. And I dare say God prepared him through his life for this purpose. In spite of whatever you can go back and say what mistakes he made and what the things he went through and all the questionable things or whatever. There's a lot of things like that coming out. But every great leader has had stuff like that. It was all a part of preparation, and it affected who he became in the end. Sad to say, some Christians have said that we're worshiping Trump, when in reality, we are standing strong with the one God has raised up. And there is clearly a difference, which, sad to say, some Christians are greatly lacking in wisdom to discern between the two, worship versus strong support, or just as narcissism versus strong character. Now, let me say this too before I continue on in my notes, is I know that I've not been, God hasn't raised me up to be a great leader speaking out in these things, as he has raised up many ministers and Christian speakers who are speaking out against these things, who have a strong stand and are taking their place in doing this and receiving great attack for what they're doing. And a lot of these people I do listen to. Now, I've not focused on that so much, but I do believe it is very important, even critical in this time, to understand these things. So even though maybe I'm not raised up to be one of the main leaders right now who are speaking out on these things by any means, but I do know that I need to take a stand, and all of us need to take the right stand and speak out and be involved in whatever way that we can where we're at. We don't have to be raised up to be a great leader. And as a minister, this is my place and my action to be involved. So I taught on biblical civil government and explained a lot of these things. And I believe we're at a time where things are getting strong and things need to be said again. We need to be encouraged concerning what God is about to do. Now, we're talking about worshiping, so can the support of somebody get to a place of worshiping them? Yes, it can. Even the Jews came to a place of worshiping Moses, if you would, where in Acts chapter 6, verse 11, they brought false accusations against Stephen, saying that he spoke blasphemous words against Moses and God, putting Moses first before God. They were seeking to have Stephen killed. So saying he was blasphemous against Moses means that they believed that speaking against Moses deserved the death penalty, just like the Muslims, a false religion, kills anybody who speaks out against their false prophet, Muhammad. So, can some people go too far? Yes. but to write off everybody who strongly supports a leader, especially one who is chosen of God to lead them through these tough times, as worshiping him is nothing more than yielding to Satan to bring attacks against God's anointed, no matter how much they say they love God. We are not putting Trump above God because we acknowledge that it is God who has chosen him in this time of this divine reset, God's turnaround, bringing this country back to the biblical foundation that our founding forefathers established in this constitutional republic. Even though it is very clear that God is the deliverer, it's also interesting to note that God chooses a man to be a leader through whom he brings his deliverance, just like Moses, Samson, King David, Winston Churchill, and even now, President Donald Trump. But always remember that a person can be thanked for being a willing party for God to fulfill his purpose. Yet God gets all the glory and the praise for doing it, for fulfilling the plan, for bringing deliverance. In this divine reset, this nation will be more righteous than ever, more just than ever, and more prosperous than ever, because this nation will hold strong to the biblical standard, the biblical morals, more than ever, to prepare this nation and many nations around the world for the Lord's return. God has prophesied that his deliverance from this satanic oppression of liberal government is compared to the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. And God raised up Moses as his leader in that time. And God has raised up his leader in this time. And again, I emphasize, and that leader is President Donald J. Trump. This is why the liberals hate him so, because they are following Satan. When we oppose, as Christians, but as we oppose God's choice for leader, we oppose God. Christians who oppose President Trump as God's leader are no different than Korah's rebellion against Moses, who was God's chosen leader of that time. Folks, we are presently in a war, a civil war. Not war as we commonly know it, with everybody out with their guns and generals leading us, civil war, but a war versus good and evil, right versus wrong, God versus Satan in this country. And after the recent assassination attempt against President Trump, we are about to see things accelerate as God's involvement through our prayers is causing the satanic agenda of the liberals through the Democratic Party to be stopped. And they are now like rats trapped in a corner and are beginning to lash out in desperation. A vision given to George Washington during the Revolutionary War revealed this. Also, there were two visions in more recent times that were given to Kenneth E. Hagin that reveal this as well. And by no means am I saying that these are the only two visions or even prophetic words that have been given in more recent times, but simply the two that I'm going to look at right now, because God seems to be speaking through a lot of people, bringing forth visions and revelation, visions and revelation concerning all of this. But don't just necessarily believe anything and everything out there. Know by the Spirit of God what's right and what's not. And I've recommended people to listen to during this time several of these ministers, of which have been on the well-known show Flashpoint with Gene Bailey. So in taking a look at these visions, I first want to take a look at the vision given to the first vision given to Kenneth E. Hagin, and I'll be reading from his book. I Believe in Visions, and it's not going to be real lengthy, but I want to bring out some things that are interesting. And he said at this point, he said, about this time, the Holy Spirit came upon me again. It seemed as if a wind were blowing upon me, and I fell upon my face, on the platform. As I lay under the power of God, it seemed as if I were standing high on a plane somewhere in space, and could see for miles and miles around me, just as one can stand on the Great Plains United States and gaze off into distance for miles. I looked in every direction, but I couldn't see a sign of life anywhere. I'm going to skip this part of it. It's not really as important. But as I looked to the west, I saw what appeared to be a tiny dot on the horizon. It was the only moving thing I could see. As I watched, it grew larger and came toward me, taking on shape and form. Soon I could see it was a horse. As it came closer, I could see a man upon the horse. He was riding toward me at full speed. As he approached, I could see he held the reins of the horse's bridle in his hand, and in his left hand, high above his head, he held a scroll of paper. When the horseman reached me, he pulled on the reins and stopped and stood on his right side. And I stood on his right side, He passed the scroll from his left to his right hand and handed it to me. As I unscrolled the scroll, which was a roll of paper 12 to 14 inches long, he said, "Take and read." At the top of the pages, in big, bold, black print, were the words, "War and Destruction." I was struck dumb. He laid his right hand on my head and said, "Read in the name of Jesus Christ." I began to read what was written on the paper, and as the words instructed me, I looked and saw what I had just read about. So he was reading the scroll, and then he'd look in the vision. He would actually see it taking place. Then I'm going to go down to this point and says, "And I looked at the scroll again, and again I looked to see what I had read about. I saw the skyline of a large city. Looking closer, I saw the skyscrapers were burnt out hulls, portions of cities in ruins, and it was not written that just one city would be destroyed, burned, and in ruins, but there would be many such cities destroyed." And this is one thing in his vision, even from back then, that a lot of people were kind of like, what? In America? Surely not. But folks, we've already began to see this in 2020 when the homegrown terrorists of BLM and Antifa were allowed to cause a lot of devastation in, as he said, even in here, in just portions of cities. But I'll get to that a little bit more, because I now wanted to compare this to the vision given to George Washington during, I think, if I remember correctly, it might have been during the Winter of Valley Forge that we hear so much about. And but God showed him three great perils. Now, even though George Washington wasn't a prophet, it is not uncommon for God to speak to the leader of a nation, and especially somebody we deem as the founder of this nation, in George Washington. So he received a vision. God showed him three great perils that would come upon this nation. The first one was the Revolutionary War that they were going through at that time. The second one, it was revealed of the Civil War. And now there's one that speaks about really what I can clearly see as what's going on right now, as nothing else in our history is the fulfillment of this. And since we are at the very end before Jesus comes, so it couldn't be referring to something in the future. So as I read this, I'm just going to read the third great peril in this vision, and it says, "Then my eyes beheld a fearful scene. From each of these continents," because in the other parts of the visions you had Europe, Asia, and Africa, so these are the continents it's referring to. "From these three continents there arose thick black clouds and were soon joined into one. And throughout this mass there gleamed a dark red light, by which I saw hordes of armed men. These men, moving with the cloud, marched by land and sailed by sea to America, which country was enveloped in the volume of the cloud. And I dimly saw these vast armies devastate the whole country and the villages and towns and cities which I seen springing up. As my ears listened to the thundering of the cannon, the clashing of the swords, and the shouts and cries of millions in mortal combat, I again heard the mysterious voice say, Son of the Republic, look and learn. Where the voice had ceased and the dark shadowy angel placed his trumpet once more to his mouth and blew a long and fearful blast. Instantly a light as of 1,000 suns shone from above me and pierced and broke into the fragments of dark cloud which enveloped America. At the same moment, the angel upon whose head still shone the word Union, and who bore our national flag in one hand and a sword in the other, descended from the heavens, attended by legions of white spirits, or we would say angels. These immediately joined the inhabitants of America, who I perceived were well nigh overcome, but who immediately, taking courage again, closed up their broken ranks and renewed the battle. Again, amid the fearful noise of the conflict, I heard the mysterious voice saying, Son of the Republic, look and learn. As the voice sees in the shadowy angel from the last time dipped water from the ocean and sprinkled it upon America, instantly the dark cloud rolled back together with the armies it had brought, leaving the inhabitants of the land victorious. Then once more I beheld the villages, towns, and cities springing up where I had seen them before, while the bright angel, planting the azure standard he had brought in the midst of them, cried with a loud voice, while the stars remain, and the heavens sent down dew upon the earth. So long shall the Union last. And taking from his brow the crown which was blazed the word Union, he placed it upon the standard, while the people, kneeling down, said, Amen. Now, here we have some things in his vision that was comparable to that, about cities being burnt out and so on, in that vision. And there's more things I want to take a look at, but I want to go ahead and continue on with this one last vision. Might be a little bit more reading that was given to Brother Hagin. That this particular video that was, and you can find it on YouTube. It said 1963 that he revealed this, whether he had received it immediately at that time or if it was some time before he finally shared it. I don't know. But it says this. He said, Yea, the hand of the Lord is upon me. The Spirit of God moved upon me. The voice of God said unto me, Come up hither, Son of Man. And I went as it were up into the air, and stood with him, the head of the church, even the Lord Jesus Christ, in the air. And as I looked down upon the ground, I could see as a map laid out before me the entire nation, all the states of the continental United States. And as I looked, he said, Behold, son, and I shall show you what shall come to pass. And this with the eyes of many shall see, and they shall remember that their ears heard, and that it shall come to pass. For there came a dark hand up out of the ocean from the east, even the Atlantic Ocean. It came up out of the sea as a hand, and it rose up into the air, and it became a dark cloud, and it filled the whole atmosphere. And yea, it swept inland like a storm from the sea. And I said, O Lord, what does this mean? And he spoke unto me and said, Son, that is the darkness of atheistic communism that is sweeping across the nation, even in the minds of men in high places and politicians with great power. And their liberties you have known, as you have seen, shall be seized and shall be taken from you. And a lot of you people in this day and age don't realize how much of our liberties have already been taken away. And I looked again, and I could see upon the map a blot, as though a bottle of ink had been spilled, and it spread out over the several states in the south and east. And then it looked, and I could see spots splotched all over the map. And I said, Lord, what does this mean? And he said, communistic inspired hatred among races shall cause greater turmoil than your nation has seen to this time. Yea, it is not the will of God, but men's hearts are perverse. They will walk without the love of God. They seek to have their own way. And so it shall be worse than you have seen. And I said, O Lord, is there a remedy? Then he said, Son of man, forget not your text, for you look at the things not seen. And so then I looked into the spirit realm, and I saw falling upon the map a ball of fire from heaven. The closer it to the earth, the bigger it got. And then as it came to the earth, it divided into small balls or sparks of fire and fell upon men. And I saw an army of men rise up, and it seemed as though their hands were fire, and there sat upon their heads a tongue of fire. And I said, what does this mean? And he said, before the worst shall come, the day of darkness shall come, there shall go those who shall go, that go, who shall carry the fullness of my truth and fire, not only in the states of this nation, but to many other places. For there is a work that must first be done spiritually before the Lord shall come. In the George Washington vision, he spoke of a thick black clouds that gleamed with dark red light. In the vision, Kenneth E. Hagin it speaks of a dark cloud in this country, and God interpreted it as atheistic communism. And red is used to represent communism. You know, red China, and we see this with Russia as well. So the black cloud gleaming with red in George Washington's vision was equivalent to the black cloud of Brother Hagin's vision, atheistic communism, which is what we are dealing with right now with this liberal, satanic liberal agenda expressed through the Democratic Party and through those who are called rhinos, which is just an acronym for Republicans in name only, for those who don't know. That is, those who call themselves Republican, but are a part of the atheistic communism of the liberals of the Democratic Party. So, boy, time is starting to go. Even though I've said that this war is not war as usual, these visions speak of those in combat. Brother Hagin spoke of portions of cities in ruins, and we have seen some of this again in 2020 with BLM, which proves to be nothing more than homegrown terrorists who have instituted by this satanic liberal agenda to undermine this country in order to bring us under a satanic counterfeit one world government. And my time is done. We'll have to take up here. Sorry, I'm breaking right in the middle of this. But until next time, be blessed.